The room wasn't supposed to feel this tense. On paper, it was meant to be controlled, predictable. Another carefully scheduled evening where the optics mattered more than the words. The lights were warm, the stage dressed in neutral tones, meant to project calm authority, and the audience had settled into their seats expecting familiarity. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the night was about to fracture in real time. The moderator adjusted his notes, glancing down once more before looking into the camera. Behind him, the backdrop glowed softly, a visual promise of order. Seated beneath the studio lights, the former president leaned back in his chair, jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened just enough to signal ease without sacrificing command. He spoke slowly, deliberately, about institutions, about democracy, about endurance. His cadence was familiar, almost comforting. Then the earpiece crackled. It was subtle at first, a pause just long enough to register as wrong. The moderator's expression shifted, not dramatically but enough. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes darted briefly off camera toward the control booth where producers were suddenly moving with urgency. "Mr. President," he said, the words catching slightly in his throat, "we've just received unexpected information." A ripple passed through the audience. Something had changed. The moderator swallowed. "We're being told that President Trump is calling in." For a split second, the room forgot how to breathe. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Some people leaned forward, others froze. This wasn't on the rundown. This wasn't agreed upon. A sitting president interrupting a predecessor's live town hall, unscheduled, unfiltered, and broadcast nationwide, was unheard of. Behind the glass, hands waved, voices rose. The control room scrambled, producers shouting over one another as they tried to decide whether to cut away or let it unfold. The moderator looked like a man who'd just been told the building was on fire. The former president didn't blink. He leaned back slightly, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other coming up to his chin. His expression was calm, almost curious. There was no rush to respond, no visible irritation, just stillness. "Put him through," he said. The words landed with quiet authority. The screen above the stage flickered, then filled with the unmistakable image of President Trump. His voice came through the speakers, loud and unrestrained, already carrying the energy of confrontation. "I had to call in," Trump said immediately. "I'm watching this whole thing, and it's a disgrace, a total disgrace." The audience shifted. Some murmured, others stared at the screen, transfixed. "You're sitting there talking about democracy," Trump continued, "when under your administration jobs were disappearing left and right. Under me, we had the best economy the world has ever seen. Everybody knows it. Nobody's ever seen anything like it." The words weren't polished. They weren't meant to be. They were blunt, forceful, designed to dominate the moment, and they carried weight, not just because of who was speaking, but because of where he still sat in power. The former president didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward the audience, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed. It sounded like someone speaking in a living room rather than on a national stage. "Well," he said softly, "it looks like we've got company tonight." Laughter broke through the tension, sharp and sudden. The room exhaled, but only briefly. Everyone could feel where this was headed. Trump pressed forward, sensing momentum. "People remember how bad things were before me," he said. "Manufacturing was dying. Other countries were taking advantage of us. I came in, I fixed it. The numbers don't lie. If it wasn't for me, this country would be in ruins." His voice rose with each sentence, filling the space, daring anyone to challenge him. All eyes shifted back to the former president. Would he take the bait? Would he match the volume? Would he let the interruptions slide? He leaned forward slightly now, hands clasped, gaze steady as he looked directly into the camera. He didn't mirror Trump's energy. He didn't interrupt. When he spoke, it was with the steadiness of someone who understood timing and restraint. "I think," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle, "the American people are less interested in who shouts the loudest and more interested in who tells them the truth." The applause was immediate, loud, sustained. The moderator shifted in his seat, half relieved, half aware that this moment had crossed into something bigger than a town hall. The clash was no longer hypothetical. It was happening, live, and viewers could feel the contrast in their gut. One voice storming, the other anchored. But this was only the opening shot. What came next wouldn't just dominate headlines, it would ripple through the East Wing itself, where the walls were already tightening around a different kind of storm. The door to the First Lady's private office closed with a sharp finality that echoed down the corridor. Aides froze mid-step. Even a Secret Service agent glanced up. Inside, Melania sat behind her desk, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the papers laid out in front of her. A glass of water sat untouched at her side. The document, creased slightly where her fingers had gripped too tightly, rested like an accusation. The DNA report. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a fury she had spent years mastering how to conceal. Silence had always been her shield, composure her armor. But this crossed a line. "They will not destroy my son," she said sharply, her accent cutting through the air. "I will not allow it." Across from her, two advisors shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat, attempting calm. "First Lady, these things, rumors, leaks, they come and go. We can get ahead of this." "Before what?" she snapped, slamming her hand against the desk. The sound was loud enough to make the walls feel smaller. "Before every paper in this country prints lies about my family?" Her voice cracked, not with weakness, but with rage sharpened by fear. "Before my son becomes a target?" The room fell silent. This wasn't politics anymore. This was personal, and everyone in that room knew it. Melania stood abruptly, pushing her chair back as she began pacing, heels striking the floor in sharp, measured beats. "I gave everything for this role," she muttered. "I stayed silent. I smiled when I wanted to scream. And this is how they repay me." One aide, younger than the rest, spoke carefully. "Ma'am, we're trying to trace the source of the leak." "Find them," Melania said, stopping cold. "I don't care how. I want to know who betrayed me." Her voice was low, absolute. The mask slipped for only a moment before snapping back into place. "Prepare statements," she ordered. "Nothing leaves this office until I approve it, not one sentence." As the aides moved to obey, one truth hung unspoken in the room. In Washington, secrecy never lasts, and somewhere beyond those walls, another figure was already watching the chaos unfold, measuring it, understanding it, and preparing to step into the center of it. Before we continue, pause for a moment. Where are you watching from right now? Let me know in the comments. I'm always struck by how far these stories travel, and I read every single response. Washington felt different the next morning, not louder, not chaotic, just heavier, like the air itself knew something was wrong, but hadn't decided how to react yet. A low fog hung over Pennsylvania Avenue as a motorcade slipped quietly through downtown streets, not headed toward a state dinner or public appearance, but toward a private law office tucked between coffee shops and brick buildings that blended into the city's background. Inside, there were no flags, no cameras, no grand statements about duty or patriotism, just lawyers. Raymond Hull sat at the center of the conference table, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, his tie loosened. Across from him were two attorneys known for one thing in Washington: cleaning political disasters before they reached daylight. Between them lay a thin folder. No one touched it. "That document," one of the lawyers said finally, tapping the table but not the folder itself, "is a live grenade. We have two options. We discredit it or we bury it under something bigger." "Discredit how?" Hall asked, already knowing the answer. "Fabrication," the lawyer replied. "Tie it to political enemies. Call it a smear campaign. Suggest it was doctored." "And if that fails?" Hall pressed. The second lawyer adjusted his cufflinks. "Then we distract. Washington forgets fast when there's another fire to chase." Hall leaned back, rubbing his temple. He'd seen this playbook work before. He'd also seen it collapse when the timing was wrong. "Distractions only work if you control the clock," he said quietly, "and right now we don't." What none of them said aloud was the most dangerous variable in the room. Melania Trump, angry, wounded, and unwilling to accept anything less than total erasure. Back at the White House, Charlotte Winslow moved briskly through the corridors, her phone pressed to her ear as she made call after call, medical contacts, legal aides, former colleagues who owed favors. Each conversation ended the same way, with uncertainty. Some said the leak originated within the medical community. Others whispered it passed through a staffer with access to protected records. Every trail dead-ended in the same place. Someone wanted this out, and they'd been careful. Charlotte entered the residence just as Melania ended a call, her expression tight. "They say they can bury it," Hull's voice crackled through the speakerphone, "but it will take time, resources." "Time we don't have," Melania snapped. She stopped pacing mid-stride, her jaw tightening. "By now," she continued, "half this city already knows. And if Kamala Harris gets her hands on this—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Charlotte hesitated, then spoke. "Ma'am, there's chatter online, small accounts. Nothing major yet, but people are asking questions." Melania turned slowly. "Shut it down," Charlotte swallowed. "How?" "Call platforms, call editors, call whoever you have to." Her voice was ice. "I don't care if it takes favors or threats. No one repeats this." The room went silent. Even in Washington, silencing everyone was a fantasy. Later that evening, the crisis team regrouped. Scenarios were thrown onto the table like cards in a losing hand, fake leaks to muddy the waters, quiet pressure on journalists, coordinated reports flagging misinformation. Each carried risk. The real danger, one advisor said carefully, isn't the report, it's the reaction. The harder we push to bury this, the more it looks like there's something to hide. Hall exhaled slowly. We need her to look calm, controlled, above it. Easier said than done. Because by then, word of Melania's fury was spreading faster than the leak itself. Staffers talked, reporters listened. Phrases like explosive outburst began appearing in private text threads between journalists waiting for confirmation bold enough to print. Hundreds of miles away in Dallas, a reporter named Lyle Morgan stared at his screen. Long after midnight, an email sat open in front of him. Attached was a scanned document that looked very real. He wasn't the only one who had it, but he was one of the few still deciding whether to run it. He made a call to a congressional staffer he trusted. "Have you heard what's happening in the East Wing?" Morgan asked. The response was immediate. "She's panicking. If you have something, you should move." Morgan leaned back, weighing ambition against caution. If he published, the story would detonate nationally. If he waited, someone else would beat him to it. While he hesitated, Kamala Harris was already reading between the lines. Inside her Dallas office, the mood was focused, not frantic. Laptops were open, emails forwarded. Screens filled with timelines, names, and arrows tracing the movement of information through Washington's bloodstream. Kamala stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, her expression calm but alert. "All right," she said. "Tell me what we know. No fluff." Her aide, Marcus Bellamy, clicked to the first slide. The document originated in a secure medical thread. Someone forwarded it. "We don't know who yet, but it's spread fast. At least 3 reporters have copies." "Why hasn't anyone published?" Kamala asked. "They're scared," Marcus replied. "Legal pressure, retaliation." Kamala let out a short breath. "That's not journalism. That's babysitting power." Another aide spoke up. "We're also hearing Melania's been volatile, shouting, making threats. Staffers are calling it her worst meltdown yet." Kamala's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not a headline," she said. "That's a symptom." She leaned forward, voice lowering. "If the reaction is that extreme, it means this cuts deeper than they want anyone to know. And when power panics, it becomes reckless." The room was quiet now. Everyone understood where this was heading. Kamala reached for her phone, dialing without hesitation. A journalist answered on the second ring. "I hear you've seen the report," she said evenly. "Off the record." A pause. "I have. Too risky to publish." "Risky for who?" Kamala asked. "You or the truth?" Silence stretched. "The First Lady's team is circling," he finally said. "They'll come down hard." Kamala didn't blink. "Then let them." She ended the call and turned back to her staff. "We don't touch Barron," she said firmly. "That's off limits. This isn't about a child." Marcus nodded. "Then what's the angle?" Kamala's voice sharpened, not louder, just clearer. "This is about secrecy, about the lengths people in power will go to protect an image while demanding silence from everyone else. The reaction is the story." She paused, letting that settle. "And if they're this desperate to bury it," she added, "then the public deserves to know why." By nightfall, Kamala was drafting her first statement. Not explosive, not accusatory, precise. The next morning, microphones clustered outside her office as she stepped forward, calm and composed. "Secrecy," she began, "is the currency of the powerful. When information leaks, that isn't chaos. That's democracy doing its job." She didn't name names. She didn't reference the report directly. She didn't have to. "And when those in the highest positions scramble to bury the truth," she continued, "we should all be asking one question. What are they afraid of us knowing?" The clip spread within hours. Cable panels debated her intent. Social feeds lit up. The narrative began to shift, not toward the document itself, but toward the White House's response. In the East Wing, Raymond Hull watched the footage play on repeat. "She's careful," he said quietly, "but she's aiming straight at us." Melania said nothing. Her jaw tightened as the realization settled in. The story was no longer about what was leaked. It was about how she reacted. And Kamala Harris was just getting started. By the time Kamala Harris stepped into the Reburn House office building, the atmosphere had already shifted. Cameras lined the hallway long before the hearing was scheduled to begin. Reporters clustered shoulder to shoulder, murmuring into phones, trading half-confirmed updates and whispers pulled from text threads that had grown louder overnight. Staffers moved faster than usual, eyes darting, voices low. Everyone sensed it. This wasn't going to be routine. Kamala walked with her usual measured stride, a slim folder tucked under her arm. No theatrics, no smile, just focus. She wasn't here to provoke. She was here to frame. Across the city, in the White House communications office, Raymond Hull leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on a muted television screen showing the hearing room filling up. "If she goes straight for it," he muttered, "we're in trouble." Melania sat beside him, arms crossed, posture rigid. She had been reassured repeatedly that Kamala would not mention Barron. That line had been made clear, but the problem was already obvious. She didn't need to. The hearing opened with procedural formalities that barely registered. Papers shuffled, names were read, the room hummed with anticipation, waiting for the moment everyone knew was coming. When Kamala's name was called, the temperature changed. She adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to pull the room toward her. Then she spoke. "America doesn't just run on laws," she said evenly. "It runs on trust." Heads lifted, pens paused. "And when those in power treat truth like it's optional," she continued, "that trust erodes, quietly, steadily, until one day people realize it's gone." A few committee members shifted in their seats. Reporters at the back leaned forward. Kamala's voice didn't rise, it sharpened. "We've seen this pattern before. Leaders demand loyalty. They demand silence. They demand that we look away when questions become inconvenient." A congressman cleared his throat, attempting to redirect. "Madam Vice President, we're here today to discuss transparency in government contracts." "Exactly," Kamala replied, locking eyes with him. "Transparency is the issue." The interruption didn't slow her, it anchored her. Whether it's contracts, classified documents, or private reports hidden to protect political families, she continued, the pattern remains the same. Bury it, silence dissent, and hope no one asks why. The room erupted into murmurs. Everyone understood the implication. She had drawn a boundary without crossing it, pointed directly at the White House without naming it. Cameras zoomed in as Kamala lifted a single sheet of paper. Not the DNA report, something smarter. "This," she said, tapping the page lightly, "is a timeline." She paused, letting that word sink in. Within 48 hours of a private report circulating, calls were made to media outlets. Editors were pressured. Platforms were contacted. Discussion was flagged. She looked up. "If the report were meaningless," she asked calmly, "if it were fabricated, why scramble so aggressively to bury it?" A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. It wasn't about Barron anymore. It was about power. A reporter shouted from the back. "Madam Vice President, are you accusing the First Lady of using her office to suppress information?" Kamala didn't hesitate. "I'm saying this," she replied. "The truth doesn't need bodyguards if it can stand on its own." In the White House, Melania's fist clenched. "She's exploiting this," she said sharply. Hall shook his head. "She's reframing it. If we attack her, we look guilty. If we stay silent, she owns the narrative." Melania's eyes stayed on the screen. "Silence makes us look weak." Back in the hearing room, Kamala leaned into the microphone for her closing remarks. Her tone softened, but the weight increased. "Families should be off limits," she said. "But when secrecy becomes a shield for power, when anger replaces accountability, we all lose." She paused. "This isn't about one household. It's about every household that deserves honesty from the people who lead them." The room erupted. Questions fired from every direction. Committee members whispered urgently. Producers already clipped the footage, sending it racing toward evening broadcasts. Kamala gathered her papers and stood. She walked out the same way she had entered. Calm, composed, unshaken, but her words lingered like thunder after a storm. By nightfall, the clip was everywhere. Cable networks looped it without pause. Pundits dissected every sentence. The phrase, "the truth doesn't need bodyguards," crawled across the bottom of screens, repeated so often it began to feel permanent. In diners, living rooms, and offices across the country, people watched and reached the same conclusion. If it was nothing, why the panic? Social media amplified the moment mercilessly. Hashtags surged. Commentary exploded. Memes mocked. Whispered accounts of shattered vases and closed doors inside the White House. Raymond Hull watched the damage spread in real time. "She didn't mention Barron," he said quietly, "and she still turned this into a storm." Charlotte looked at him. "Because she made the reaction the story." Melania entered the room without announcing herself. "This woman," she said coldly, pointing at the screen, "thinks she can use me." No one spoke. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Kamala fielded calls from every major network. Producers wanted interviews, anchors wanted reactions. Her staff buzzed with energy. Marcus glanced at a tablet. "You're trending nationally." Approval among independents just jumped. Kamala exhaled slowly. Good, but we keep it about principle. She looked up. The moment this becomes gossip, we lose. Outside Washington, Americans debated the issue in ordinary places. Parents talked about protecting children. Workers complained about leaders hiding the truth. What united them was a single, unsettling realization. Secrecy breeds mistrust. Back at the White House, Hull finally spoke the truth no one wanted to hear. First Lady, if we strike back too hard, we prove her point. But if we don't respond, she controls the narrative. Melania's gaze hardened. Then we create a new one. Before we continue, let me ask you, has this moment shifted how you see power and secrecy? If this part hit you hard, type truth in the comments. I read every single one. By the third day, silence itself had become the headline. Networks ran tickers, questioning why the First Lady hadn't responded. Opinion columns speculated about her state of mind. Analysts replayed Kamala Harris's hearing clip and asked the same question in different ways. If there's nothing to hide, why hasn't she spoken? Inside the East Wing, the quiet was deliberate. Heavy curtains were drawn, muting the daylight and giving the room a sealed, almost bunker-like feel. Papers were spread across the table, press clippings, transcripts, polling snapshots. Raymond Hull stood at the head of the room, notes in hand. Charlotte Winslow sat across from him, jaw tight, eyes scanning headlines that grew harsher by the hour. Melania entered last. She wore a pale suit, perfectly tailored, her expression carved into stillness. She didn't sit. "Tell me what we do," she said. Hull cleared his throat. "We strike back, but carefully. We position you first as a mother, then as a First Lady. We frame Harris as reckless. Someone willing to drag families into political theater." Charlotte slid a single page across the table. "We've drafted a statement. Controlled, no direct mention of her. Just a reminder that children should be off limits." Melania scanned it once, then set it down. "Not enough," Hull frowned. "Harder could backfire. Harris has public sympathy right now. If we attack directly, it looks like we're hiding something." Melania leaned forward slightly, her voice low and exact. "I am not hiding," she said. "I am protecting. There is a difference." No one argued. When Melania spoke like that, measured, resolute, the room adjusted around her. "She makes me look desperate," Melania continued. "I will show them I am not." Later that afternoon, a small camera crew entered the White House quietly. There were no decorations, no audience, no applause cues. This wasn't a celebration or a visit, it was a message. Melania sat near a window, sunlight catching the edge of her face. The framing was intentional, soft, intimate, maternal. She looked directly into the camera. "I have always believed children must be off limits," she said, her accent precise, her voice steady. "What I see now is shameful. People in positions of power using rumors and lies to attack my family." She paused. "My son deserves privacy, not spectacle, and I will never stop protecting him." The recording lasted less than 2 minutes, but it landed like a stone dropped into still water. Within minutes, networks aired it on repeat. Commentators split instantly. Supporters praised her strength, her restraint. Critics pointed out what she hadn't addressed. She hadn't denied anything. She had scolded those asking questions. In Dallas, Kamala Harris's staff watched the clip together. The room was quiet when it ended. "She's leaning fully into the family angle," Marcus said. "That makes her untouchable to some people." Kamala crossed her arms. "Untouchable, or protected until the truth slips again." She shook her head slightly. "You can't erase a cover-up with sympathy." The next morning, Melania's pushback expanded. Friendly outlets echoed her message. Commentators framed the controversy as an attack on motherhood itself. Headlines shifted subtly from "what is being hidden" to "has decency been lost?" In Washington, the effect was immediate but uneven. Some rallied to Melania's defense, others grew more suspicious. Raymond Hull studied the polling updates. "We slowed the bleeding," he said, "but we didn't stop it." Charlotte looked up. "Because Harris didn't make this about family. She made it about power." Hull nodded grimly. "And power, once questioned, rarely regains its footing easily." Across the country, conversations grew sharper. Parents debated privacy. Workers complained about leaders playing games with truth. The issue had escaped Washington and settled into daily life, which was exactly what Kamala Harris had intended. Back in the East Wing, Hull finally said what everyone feared. "If we escalate, we risk proving her point. If we retreat, she defines us." Melania stared out the window, watching the city move beyond the gates. "Then," she said quietly, "we do neither." She turned back to the room. "We wait, and when I speak again, it will end this." Hole wasn't sure whether that was confidence or warning. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. By the time the fourth morning arrived, Washington had stopped pretending this was a passing controversy. Melania Trump's silence, measured, intentional, had slowed the bleeding, but hadn't healed the wound. Every hour without a definitive response hardened suspicion rather than softening it. Cable news no longer asked if something was being hidden. They asked how long it had been hidden. Inside the White House, tension coiled tightly beneath the polished surfaces. Raymond Hole stood near the window of the communications office, phone pressed to his ear, listening to another editor explain, carefully, politely, why the story wasn't going away. When the call ended, he didn't turn around immediately. "We've lost control of the clock," he said finally. Charlotte looked up from her laptop. "Then we move ahead of it." Hole shook his head. "We're already behind. Harris framed this as a trust issue. You don't outrun that. You either confront it, or it consumes you." Across the room, Melania sat perfectly still. For days she had watched others speak for her, defend her, interpret her, weaponize her silence and her words in equal measure. She had followed advice when it suited her and ignored it when it didn't, but now the choice was hers alone. "They think," she said slowly, "that because I am quiet, I am weak." No one answered. She stood. "They forget," she continued, "that I survived this city by saying less, not by saying nothing." Hole turned. "What are you planning?" Melania met his gaze. "I will speak," she said, "but not the way they expect." The statement was scheduled without fanfare, no podium, no crowd, no press conference. Just Melania, standing alone in a neutral room, cameras rolling. When the footage aired that evening, it felt different immediately. "There has been much said," Melania began, her voice controlled, "about privacy, about power, about reactions." She paused, eyes steady. "What I will say now is this. My family has been judged not by facts but by fear, and fear is a powerful weapon in politics." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse Kamala Harris by name, but she shifted the tone. "I will not allow speculation to replace truth," she said, "nor will I allow outrage to become evidence." For the first time, the statement edged closer to denial, without quite reaching it. "I stand by my role as a mother," she concluded, "and I stand by the principle that not everything whispered deserves a spotlight." The broadcast ended. The response was immediate and divided. Supporters called it strength. Critics called it avoidance. Analysts argued over whether she had said too much or not enough. But something else happened too. The momentum slowed. Not because the questions had been answered, but because the public had reached a limit. In Dallas, Kamala Harris watched the clip in silence. "She's smart," Marcus said. "She narrowed the field." Kamala nodded. "Yes, but she didn't close it." She leaned back slightly, thoughtful. "She's betting people will get tired before the truth surfaces," Kamala said. "Sometimes that works." She looked at her staff. "But trust doesn't disappear quietly, and it doesn't come back easily." Kamala declined every interview request that night. Instead, she released one final statement. Short, restrained, unmistakably deliberate. "Power is strongest," it read, "when it welcomes scrutiny instead of fearing it. The American people deserve transparency, not because they demand it, but because democracy requires it. No names, no accusations, just principle." And that was enough. The story didn't end with a confession. It didn't end with proof released or sealed. It ended the way many political battles do, with perception altered, lines redrawn, and trust permanently shifted. Melania Trump remained protected by strategy, by sympathy, by silence. Kamala Harris emerged, strengthened, not because she exposed a document, but because she exposed a reaction. And America was left to decide which mattered more. Before we continue, take a breath and tell me honestly, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and these conversations matter more than you think. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. These moments where power, privacy, and truth collide are never simple, and they're never comfortable. If this narrative made you pause, question, or reflect, let that voice be heard. Like the video if it resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass it along to someone who believes accountability still matters. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, and your perspective is part of the truth.